I had a little problem with Tim Cook yesterday.
President Donald Trump isn't pleased with Apple CEO Tim Cook after the company's decision to move production of iPhones sold in the U.S. from China to India.
I said to him, Tim, you're my friend. I treated you very good. You're coming in with $500 billion, but now I hear you're building all over India. I don't want you building in India.
The decision was made to avoid paying higher tariffs, which the company says could add $900 million to its costs this quarter.
I said, Tim, look, we've treated you really good. We put up with all the plants that you built in China for years. India can take care of themselves. They're doing very well. We want you to build here, and they're going to be upping their production in the United States. Apple. So Apple's already in for $500 billion, but they're going to be upping their production.
Apple didn't immediately respond to CNN's request for comment.
What's going on, everybody? This is Professor Zeus, and I'm back with another video. If this is your first time on the channel, just know I greatly appreciate you for stopping by. Go ahead and hit subscribe. We're on our way to 2,000 subscribers. We're taking it the humble route. Guys, listen. We're looking at President Donald Trump and Tim Cook, CEO of Apple. They're having a little discrepancy because, I guess Tim Cook is saying he wants to build factories in India, and President Trump has an issue with that. It's about tariffs. It's about manufacturing. And we're going to talk about how this could hit your wallet. And especially with, Walmart just came out with some news already, telling a lot of the consumers about price hikes. So, let's try to break this all down. So, while speaking in Qatar, I gave you guys in some of my previous videos how, President Trump, he's doing like kind of a Middle Eastern tour, trying to get a feel for what's going on. It's giving a lot of talks and different things like that. So, he was speaking in Qatar, he was saying how he had a little problem with Tim Cook because, Apple is planning to, manufacture iPhones in India, build factories in India and different things like that. President Trump is saying, hey, Tim, you're my friend. I treated you very well. You're coming in with $500 billion. I made a video about that, how, Tim Cook had pledged that he'd be investing $500 billion into America. And President Trump was also saying, but I know, I hear you're building all over India. I don't want you building in India. And, let's try to unpack this, right? President Trump, he obviously feels a way, because he's pushing for a bigger agenda. His administration has, if we all know, you guys have seen my previous videos, he slapped historic tariffs on nearly all goods coming to the United States. And, these tariffs are imported products, and they're designed, right, to boost American manufacturing, balance trade and fund tax cuts. But like I've said previously and over again, 80% of Americans want manufacturing and want production to come back to America. However, out of that 80%, not even 20% of the people are willing to, switch their desk jobs in an office with air conditioning to going, and working in a coal mine or working in a factory assembling toys or assembling iPhones. Like, a lot of people just will not do it, right? Because President Trump's logic is like, if companies like Apple, build in the United States, right, they avoid all these tariffs, they create American jobs, and they keep prices stable. But, like I said, this cannot happen overnight, right? Apple has been shifting a lot of iPhone production to India in the last few years. And this isn't like a small feat, right? In 2025's fiscal year, Apple has produced $22 billion worth of iPhones in India, which is a 60% jump from the year before, right? So that means India now accounts for about 15% of global, iPhone output, and Apple is aiming to make it the main hub for US-bound iPhones by next year. And me telling you this is like, why India? It's partly, due to Apple trying to diversify away from China, where 90% of iPhones are currently assembled, right? Especially with all these, supply chain issues, tariffs, different things like that. And also, India's labor costs are actually lower. And the country, they have their own, Made in India program, which is really appealing for a lot of tech giants. As you can see in one of my previous videos, I also stated how Elon Musk wanted to meet with Prime Minister Modi of India to see how he can build a Tesla gigafactory in India, because he's also thinking like, man, how can I also think of ways to, cut corners, or not even cut corners, but find some way to make the most out of my money to build my products, right? So a lot of people are looking towards India to make their products. Now it gets tricky because, President Trump's tariffs are already shaking things up, right? Earlier, this year, Tim Cook, he said that tariffs could cost Apple $900 million in a single quarter. And again, look at Nvidia. Jensen Huang from, Nvidia, he said that, with the tariffs, it could cost them like 5.5 billion a quarter if they try to sell to China, right? And that's a lot of money even for these tech giants, right? These companies are worth trillions, but that's still a lot of money. Now, in order to, maneuver and dodge all these different costs, Apple has to ramp up production in India, where tariffs on Chinese goods don't apply, right? But obviously, President Trump, he feels some way about that. He wants these factories and these jobs in the United States, right? And he even claimed that Apple would up its U.S. production after their, conversations, even though Apple hasn't confirmed any of these conversations or that this would happen, right? So let's talk about what this means for me and what this means for you, because we're both consumers and we love iPhones. We love Apple, right? President Trump's tariffs, are hitting, all these companies hard, and they're passing the costs on to us. If you look at Walmart just today, they announced that price increases on tons of products are going to be happening, and they're blaming it on the tariffs, right? From electronics to clothes, everyday items are getting pricier and more expensive. And Apple, if they're forced to build iPhones in the United States, you could look at iPhones costing from $1,200 to $3,500. Can you imagine paying $3,500 for an iPhone? But you got to think, why would it cost $3,500? Because American labor is way more expensive than labor in China, than labor in India. And Apple's supply chain isn't set up for US production. That's just the harsh reality of things. So building factories here would take years, and it would take billions of dollars. So imagine you spend $3,500 for iPhone, right? For a lot of us, that's impossible. And it's not just, for iPhones. Tariffs are driving up costs across the board, which is why Walmart is also raising their prices. This is the ripple effect for these types of trade policies. Companies like Apple are now caught between a rock and a hard place. You could either pay massive tariffs to import from India or China, or you could build in the United States and deal with sky high costs. Either way, consumers like me and you, we're likely going to be paying for all of this, right? Now, obviously, Apple's not, totally ignoring the United States. Again, in February, I dropped a video speaking about how Apple is announced that they'd be, spending 500 billion as an investment in the United States to expand U.S. facilities over the next 4 years, creating about 20,000 jobs, right? And President Trump, he loved this when this was announced. He loved it. He pushed forward. He said, "Oh, this is a great win for us." But then you got to think about what's the catch, right? This money is mostly going to AI server farms and training academies, not for iPhone factories, right? So building iPhones in the United States is a whole different beast, right? And a lot of people are saying it's nearly impossible to do because of how global supply chains are just so complicated and so complex, and it's just so expensive, right? So, what's the bigger picture, right? Again, America first, make America great again, all those types of agendas, and using tariffs to pressure companies like Apple to bring manufacturing back to America. I mean, the reality is messy, and we can only sit back and watch on how it's going to look, right? Apple has already invested heavily in places like India, and they're employing around 200,000 people already through their vendors like Foxconn and Tata. These are different vendors. So they pull back, it could strain the US-India relations, especially since India has threatened retaliatory tariffs on American goods. At the same time, consumers are already feeling the pinch from all these rising prices, and forcing US production to make things worse. Again, tariffs are a good thing in the long term, but in the short term, I don't know. It's a double-edged sword, right? It's going to drive up costs a lot for these companies, and that just means higher prices for me and you. Walmart is already sounding the alarm, and if Apple can't find some sort of workaround, your next iPhone could cost a fortune. This showdown between, President Trump and Tim Cook, it's just kind of like a glimpse into a bigger battle over where stuff gets made and who pays the price. You already seen what happened with Amazon, right? Amazon said they wanted to have on checkout this how how much you're paying for Amazon, and then this is the tariff price. But we see how that went down. But obviously that's a lot to digest. Let me know what you think. Should Apple build more in the United States, or is still building in India? Is that the smarter play? And are you ready to pay more for your iPhone because of all these tariffs? Drop your thoughts in the comments, man. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more breakdowns, more insights into tech, more insights into geopolitics, more insights into AI and different things like that. And never, ever forget, it's you and I verse. Information, application, execution. Until next time, peace.